Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Hello and welcome to the 60th episode of Living on the Edge. Across the country, industrialization has come to be associated with deforestation, irreparable damage to agriculture and pollution. But there's a flip side to all this: endless employment opportunities and development. This paradox confronts our correspondents wherever they travel. Yogesh Verma, a viewer from Jabalpur, feels that the development impact of projects should be reported and analyzed before they are cleared. Taking a cue from this observation, Tisha Srivastava visited Bhigwan Village near Pune, where the Indonesian paper multinational Sinar Mas is readying its plant. Sinar Mas claims to be using eco-friendly technology, but farmers in this drought-prone area have another story to tell.
It's Indonesia's biggest paper manufacturer. It's received permission to set up a 650 crore rupee project in Maharashtra to manufacture paper from imported pulp. And it's getting set to roll. The only catch for Sinar Mas, as the company is called, is the water requirement. The project, situated on the Pune-Sholapur highway, requires 2.5 crore litres of water every day, and the area is drought affected. But what would seem an insurmountable obstacle has been bypassed by tapping the water of the nearby Ujjani reservoir, meant primarily for agricultural purposes.
Work at the construction site of the Sinar Mas Paper and Pulp project is on in full force. Despite political interference, local agitation by farmers, and many objections raised by the Ministry of Environment and the State Pollution Control Board, one chief question remains unanswered: how has such a water-intensive industry been allowed in a severely drought-prone area?
In fact, in June 1995, the Ministry of Environment and Forests had issued a stay order saying there is acute shortage of water in the area proposed for the project, which is contrary to the information submitted to us. And yet, within 15 days, the order was revoked without the mandatory site inspection. The Environment Ministry officials, when approached, feigned ignorance. The managing director of Sinar Mas was quick to contradict this.
Well, actually, that is not a development, which I would not say that there was a stay order.
Oh, one of the reasons was also that there's acute shortage of water, which wasn't mentioned in your project report to them.
No, which is not true. Project report of ours, we got a rapid environment survey done. You see, that's why I said disinformation campaign. You see, what's happening is there is a vested interest. The vicious hand of that vested interest, I can see how they have been going around, taking out letters out of government files, circulating amongst news agencies. It is because
it was clear that there were going to be no straight answers. Instead, there was an invitation to visit Indonesia and see how eco-friendly Sinar Mas really was. That apart, some of the other allegations against the project are:
गन्ना लगाना है तो 12 माह ही पानी देना पड़ता है थ्रू आउट द ईयर. अभी ये इरिगेशन डिपार्टमेंट ने उसका कट करके 8 महीने का परमिशन दे दिया है. अभी ये सिनार मास को पानी देने के बाद उन्होंने ये शुरू कर दिया.
And that reservoir was originally meant for irrigation purposes.
Which is not true. We were told by the irrigation department that this 60% of it is reserved for the industry.
Sugarcane farmers find that they can't cultivate their crops anymore. They're wondering whether or not they should sell their lands and move.
Not willingly we have given consent, but we were forced by the government and this all higher authorities. They say you will have to give, and we will have any condition we shall purchase.
MIDCचे म्हणजे जे लोक आहेत शासनाचे, त्यांनी अशा प्रकारच्या जमिनी आम्ही त्यातून वगळू, त्या जमिनी घेणार नाही अशा प्रकारचं त्यावेळेला शेतकऱ्यांना सांगितल्यामुळं त्यावेळेला शेतकऱ्याची आणि शासनाची आणि त्या प्रकल्पाच्या लोकांची तडजोड झाली. परंतु तशा प्रकारचं त्या जमिनी वगळल्या गेलेल्या नाहीत आणि त्यामुळे शेतकऱ्यामध्ये ज्या चांगल्या जमिनी आहेत किंवा ज्या पिकाऊ जमिनी आहेत, ज्या लागवडी खाणे येणाऱ्या जमिनी आहेत, त्या देण्याबद्दल शेतकरी नाखुश आहेत. आता जी परिस्थिती आहे 2 वर्षात त्यामध्ये पाणी शेतकऱ्यांना कमी पडू लागलेलं आहे.
Water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. That is because of reasons other than Sinar Mas. In fact, Sinar Mas is going to make water available to these farmers for the first time in their life and history.
But there are other critical questions that also need to be answered. Where and how will the effluent, presumably treated, be discharged every day? The company plans to send 2 crore litres into a pipeline that hasn't been constructed so far, which will empty into a natural nala near Bhigwan Village, which in turn connects to a 12-kilometre long open drain that joins the river Nira.
And let me tell you, let anyone in this state convince me that we have taken fertile land, that we have taken land where a blade of grass was growing.
Living on the Edge visited Bhigwan Village only to find that right next to the spot where not even a blade of grass is supposed to be growing, there was thriving vegetation. Not only that, the discharged water will pass through more than 10 villages with a total population of almost 40,000 people dependent on cattle rearing for survival. They fear that groundwater contamination will destroy their lives.
We will have primary treatment, secondary treatment, tertiary treatment, and what more all the treatment that you're talking about, or the 4th treatment.
What actually happens is to be seen in the fuzzy future. Opposition to the project has crystallized in the form of Sinar Mas Vidroha Samiti. You may argue that it consists of people who stand to lose the most when production begins, but they also have a point of view.
या पाण्यामुळेच आमची पिकं जळणार असतील आणि हा इंडोनेशियन कारखाना जर तयार होत असेल तर कागद खाऊन आम्ही जगणार नाही, आमची पिकं जगणार आहेत, त्यामुळे आम्ही हा कारखाना फोडून टाकू.
Now we are also aware that it's a matter of 6 months that Sinar Mas will either be, will be working.
For the common man, industrial growth almost all across India has meant development, employment opportunities, and unfortunately pollution. On that last front, Sinar Mas hopes to differ. And since only seeing is believing, we have to wait and hope that this is an exception that sets a worthy precedent for all industrial growth to come.
Unless we change our attitudes and actions, we are not going to be able to put any kind of brake on our cities and towns becoming the filthiest and most polluted in the world. It's been estimated that almost 60% of the waste that we generate is made up of non-biodegradable matter. That means waste that is difficult to dispose. Now, we can help the local authorities by separating the non-biodegradable waste that we generate, like plastic packets and bottles and containers, from biodegradable waste, like waste food. Further, if we separate toxic waste, such as perfume bottles and pesticide containers, then it would make things much better in terms of waste disposal. Remember, every action of ours counts.
Still to come, what displacement means for lakhs of people and the effects of passive smoking. The 20th century has seen far more people leave their homes and country than ever before in history in search of better lives. For a vast majority, the move wasn't voluntary. It was and is part of a struggle to survive. S.K. Jaina of Bhubaneswar, Leela Sheshadri of Madras and Johnny Jose of Ratlam want us to document the sufferings of a community uprooted from their lands to see just how they are coping. Shonar Joshi travelled into the rugged interiors of Madhya Pradesh to bring you this report.
Meet Begu Bega. He's 78 years old and is described by the doctors as mentally unstable. And who's to blame Begu? Even you would feel unsettled if you had been evicted from your land 3 times over a 20-year period. He comes from Singrauli, an industrial zone in Madhya Pradesh. The dichotomy that confronts you here would amaze you. At one end, you have open fields stretching to meet the clear blue horizon. At the other end are the dark and dusty coal mines and power plants. Trapped in between are tens of thousands of tribals like Begu.
It was a tribal dominated area in the earlier times, The Gonds, the Baigas, the Panikas, they were the majority of people who were dwelling in Singrauli. Now if you see the composition, a lot of people talk about how these people have actually migrated, or not migrated, this will not even be called migration, They've been forced out of these their own lands,
हम लोग के देखिए कोई जगह ही नहीं है, जो ही पता है वो सरकार आकर के हड़प देता है, यहाँ तक हमारा जमीन है, यहाँ तक हमारा जमीन है।
तो क्यों हड़पते हैं? कुछ बनाने के लिए?
कुछ बनाने के लिए बोलते हैं, वो आएगा कोई जबरदस्ती भी आएगा, बोलेगा इतना पर हमारा पट्टा है, सरकार आएगा बोला हमारा जमीन है।
Ever since the construction of the Rehan Dam, which led to the displacement of 300,000 locals, harassment and repeated and forced resettling has become common. Farmers by circumstance, the only valuable asset for these people is their land. To have that taken away, and that too by force, has been a traumatic experience. What's worse is that they seem to be at a total loss as to how to handle the injustice being openly heaped on them.
आज कोई ये सेक्शन आपका है ना, तो आपसे लड़ के यहाँ हैं, आप ही दिए हैं इसको, आप ही दिए हैं, मगर तभी हमें इसमें लड़के भी हैं।
यानी आप हमको डराएंगे तो हम डरेंगे, तो आप जितना मांगे तो आपको हम दे सकते हैं। हाँ हजूर, हाँ मालिक हैं। भाई मैं निप्पड़ हूँ, हम एक किसान हैं, एक हम पब्लिक हैं, नहीं समझ रहे हैं। आपने सरकार का नौकर हैं, मैं आप ही को सरकार समझ रहा हूँ, पर उन्होंने पब्लिकों को नाजायज फ़ायदा लेते हुए, नाजायज हर तरह के काम करते हुए जो है कि पब्लिकों को परेशान ही परेशान है।
Except for a few thousand of the 300,000 people, no one else has been given even minimum security. No one has been provided an alternative livelihood, that they have essentially, as many of us argue, been consigned to the dustbins of history.
Although the central government has laid down rules regarding rehabilitation, they are never followed. Locals complain that they have neither received monetary compensation nor alternative lots of land to sustain themselves.
It is our policy of NTPC that whatever standard of living these persons had before these plants were set up, we should be able to improve upon that.
If you read the policies carefully, the national policy or the NTPC policy or the Coal India policy, they eventually wriggle out of the land for land option, and then they say no, we will provide some employment.
We can provide them some jobs like cleaning of drains and all those things, but they don't accept.
Are you therefore acknowledging that these people will be just thrown to the winds to fend for themselves?
We can definitely help them to rehabilitate them by other schemes, but employment may not be possible.
Can you give them land?
Land for land was one of the options, but we are not able to get the land in that area.
It is obvious that the situation in Singrauli has reached a breaking point. It is just a matter of time before the locals take matters into their own hands and begin to fight back for what has always been rightfully theirs. As our team moved deep into the interiors of Madhya Pradesh, we were surprised to find evidence of the same unrest wherever industrial development was occurring. We finally reached Jhabua, another district, and found another tribal community, happy and proud of itself. But we were surprised to learn that they were nomads and moved from place to place in search of a living. They had been divorced from their lands ages ago.
Natural calamities also which lead to displacement. There are wider macro policies which lead to displacement, something which we cannot see. For example, when we say that people are poor, And as a result of their poverty also, there are push factors which are pushing people out of their homes, their lands, and they're brought to the brink of, leaving, migrating to other places in search of livelihoods.
वहाँ से आके यहाँ अच्छा लगता है फिर यहाँ.
वहाँ से आके यहाँ पे अच्छा लगता है. तो फिर आप लोग वापस क्यों जाते हैं?
ऐसे पैसे कमाने के लिए तो जाने पड़ता है और यहाँ वापस आ जाते हैं देश में.
The tribals in Jhabua were dependent on their forests. Along came contractors, and in no time the entire district had been stripped of all its vegetation. With no factories to work in, the tribals were forced to migrate, first to neighbouring towns like Bhopal and Indore, and then as far away as Delhi.
पेड़ जो सब काटे गए हैं, वो किसने काटे हैं?
वो तो अब लोगों ने ही काटे, सिस्टर मजबूर के कारण. किसी के घर में आटा नहीं है, चूल्हा नहीं जलता, क्या करे, लकड़ी फोड़ के कोई जलाने नहीं समझते, वो जलाना पड़ता उनको, उसे गुजारा करना तो पड़ता.
Why was it so uncontrolled?
Well, for various political reasons, they did receive some amount of political backing at that point of time, and also that there was a large-scale population pressure and a big hunger for land. So one way available would be to fell the trees and grab the land and occupy it.
Eventually, all that was left was dry, undulating terrain that made industrialists shy away and locals scatter in search for work. Living on the edge found an uncanny similarity between the conditions in Singrauli and Jhabua. Displacement was evident in both districts, as was cultural dislocation. As land was taken away, the tribals began to drift in search of more land. As they wandered further afield, they began to imbibe urban ideas which have profoundly changed their ways of thinking. Gone are the dances, traditional medical practices, and brew-making. The cohesiveness of the community has been lost forever.
Once their whole unit, the village as a unit has been disturbed. Everybody gets scattered. The mutual ties are broken, you lose your support systems.
They always bring new things from what they have seen, the urban population, and which is slowly their culture, the original culture is getting lost.
It is obvious that we cannot do without industrial development, but is it impossible to rehabilitate those who are paying for that development in areas where there and where a balance is struck between loss of land and loss of destiny?
S.K. Panda of Cuttack wants to know if non-smokers have legal redress against tobacco users. S.R. Varaprasad of Ongole wants to know what the effects of passive smoking are. And Hashma of Bombay asks why action can't be taken against those who smoke, particularly when their habit affects those who don't. Uttara Natarajan takes you into the hazy world of the passive smoker.
65-year-old Om Prakash Kaushik is a regular visitor to Delhi's All India Institute of Medical Sciences. He is suffering from advanced lung cancer and can perhaps never hope for a complete recovery. It's smoking and tobacco use that usually causes this type of cancer. But would it surprise you to know that Om Prakash has never smoked a cigarette in his life?
नहीं, बिल्कुल नहीं, कोई सिगरेट नहीं पीता. आपने अपनी पूरी मैंने कभी पी नहीं सिगरेट. नहीं, मैंने कभी सिगरेट नहीं पी. ना सिगरेट पी, ना तंबाकू खाया, ना पान खाया.
और आपको लगता है कि जब आप ऑफिस में काम करते थे, आपके आसपास लोग सिगरेट?
हाँ, वो तो पीते थे. सफ़र भी करते हैं, मोटर में भी सफ़र पीते हैं लोग, बार रेल में भी पीते हैं. अब किसको मना किया जा सकता है? परेशानी तो उसकी वजह से परेशानी तो होती थी, खांसी भी आती थी और ना पूरा भी लगता था. वैसे क्या किया जाए?
We're all aware of the dangers of smoking, but what we're not conscious of is the risk we run being passive smokers. Globally, more than 3 million people die each year of tobacco-related diseases, and the numbers are increasing rapidly. Recent studies have now proven that even passive smokers run the high risk of developing the same diseases as smokers do. We conducted an experiment to show you just how toxic cigarette smoke can be.
Who exactly is a passive smoker? Take a look around you. See that man at the pan shop? Well, the Panwala is a passive smoker. His eyes sting each time he inhales smoke blown out by a customer. He is not the only one. Millions of non-smokers at bus stops, stations, theatres, restaurants, and even in air-conditioned offices and homes are potentially at risk. They are vulnerable to a combination of what's called side stream smoke or fumes emanating from the butt end of the cigarette, and mainstream smoke that is exhaled by the smoker himself. Once the smoke gets into your lungs, it is rapidly absorbed into your bloodstream. It circulates around your body, damaging the lining of blood vessels and causing the blood to become sticky. If you are wondering what the smoke contains, prepare for the worst. Cigarette smoke contains carcinogens like polyaromatic hydrocarbons, nicotine, which is an addictive drug, radioactive compounds, hydrogen cyanide, which is a gas used in warfare, pesticides, toxic metals like arsenic and nickel, and carbon monoxide, which is a poisonous gas.
Every risk that tobacco smoke imposes on an active smoker is faced by a passive smoker, though to a slightly lesser extent. There is an increased risk of cancer, particularly of the lungs and of other parts of the body, which tobacco causes, like the bladder, like the mucous membranes of the mouth and the airway tract. There is an increased risk of heart attacks. There is an increased risk of respiratory problems. Children in particular tend to get a lot of bronchitis, asthma, respiratory infections as a result of this. Their growth could get retarded.
Studies indicate that a child living with a smoking mother will inhale smoke equivalent to 50 cigarettes a year. Living with a smoking father exposes them to about 30 cigarettes a year. If both parents smoke, then it's about 80 cigarettes every year. The risk of lung cancer and heart attacks increases by 40% for people whose spouses smoke. Not surprisingly, over 2 million deaths across the world each year can be attributed to passive smoking. If your spouse or parent is a smoker, if your colleagues smoke in your presence, if you often find yourself amid smokers in public places, if your friends smoke, welcome to the world of passive smoking. Myth. Compared to environmental pollution, cigarette smoke is hardly anything. Reality. Cigarette smoke is toxic, is known to cause cancer, and in addition to environmental pollution, it can be a deadly combination. Myth. Cigarette smoke is only harmful for a smoker as he inhales all the smoke. Reality. True, a smoker is more at risk, but a smoker only inhales filtered smoke, and 75% of passive smoke is unfiltered, as it comes off a cigarette rather than going through it. The question is, how does one escape becoming a victim of another person's vice? The only way you can is to stop tolerating smoking in your presence. Collective social pressure can also reduce its incidence.
Now, it is more than a matter of just etiquette and manners. It's a matter of protecting one's own health. I mean, if we take a tremendous care to look after our own personal appearance, one has to be equally careful about protecting one's own health. After all, if I wouldn't like to get an unnecessary cough or asthma or bronchitis because somebody else happens to be smoking in my presence, I wouldn't like to get a heart attack because somebody else happens to be persistently smoking in my presence. More important, because people may not even mind undergoing personal inconveniences for their own sake. Why should we allow our children to get inconvenienced?
My wife developed a respiratory problem. We took her to the doctor, and the doctor says it's possibly because she's smoking. But then the fact was, she was not smoking at all. It was me who was smoking. And that is really what prompted me to give up smoking, because I realized, I mean, till the time my life is being affected, it is okay. But not my wife, not my family. They are much more important.
70% of India's surface water is severely polluted by the World Health Organization standards. This water is also the largest source for domestic supply.